Hey YouTube. Let's see here. Sound check. Testing. 1, 2, 3. Sound check. Hey Cobweb Caverns, can you give me a sound check? I last week I pretty much talked about ending this So You Bought a Fish Tank series that I've been doing, but I realized that we forgot filtration, and filtration is a topic that we probably ought to cover fairly thoroughly for new fish keepers, because it's something that depending on what you want to do in a tank, that you probably ought to have a good understanding of. And here again, I'm going to recommend research. And even with good research, you will probably, as a new fish keeper, you will probably end up confused. Or as I like to call it, corn-fused. Because there's all kinds of different filtration out there. The listing of it is different. Hey, Oddball Aquatics, welcome to the stream. There are basically 3 different types of filtration that you can use on a fish tank. There's a mechanical filtration, which is basically removing particulate from the water column by drawing the water through a medium that will catch all of the particulate that's in water. And sometimes you can clear up a tank's water by mechanical filtration. It can be as simple as a power head with a small container that holds filter floss. It can be a sponge. There are a lot of different ways that you can use mechanical filtration. And basically mechanical means to catch the stuff out of the water so that it does not go back in the tank again. It stays in the filter. And that's a very useful thing to do in a tank. Detritus, a lot of stuff that gets kicked up into the water stream can be sucked up by a mechanical filtration. And as I said, it can be a canister filter, it can be a hang-on back filter, it can be the old corner box, it can be an under gravel filter. There are a lot of different ways to filter the water in a tank. And canister filter, and all of them can be used depending on what you put in them for mechanical filtration. Another type of filtration that you can use in your tank is biological filtration. And basically all you have to do to get biological filtration is to create a media for the bacteria to colonize. Once again, this can be a sponge, this can be filter floss, this can be biomedia, this can be broken up lava rocks. There are a lot of different ways that you can create medium for bacteria to grow on, and that's how you can add that kind of filtration to whatever filter you're using. You can do it with a sump, you can do it with a hang-on back, um, you could even pre-filter a under gravel filter with it, so that it just creates a medium for bacteria to colonize, and they will um, do their work on the water as it passes through the filtration. Um, the downside to bacterial filtration is that when the water quits going through on a regular basis, that bacteria will die back. And so if you shut off a canister filter or a sump for over an hour, you've basically killed off most of the bacteria that have colonized that filtration. And so it will have to restart again. If you turn it back on, you may well get a small bacteria bloom in the tank from that filter media being recolonized by bacteria, and your water may get kind of cloudy for a little while, and you won't really understand why, but it's because the bacteria died back in whatever filtration you are using. Another type of filtration that you will see if you look up different kinds of filtration is chemical filtration. And what this basically means is like your Purigen pack, where the water passes over it, or amylite, which is an old method that we use to remove ammonia from water. If you put a Purigen pack or one of the many other kinds of chemical filtrations, there are chemical sponges that people put in shipping containers that will absorb some of the different kinds of toxins that can be created in a bag that's being shipped long term, and they will change colors depending on what it is absorbing. Oddball Aquatic says, so I was running the canister filter on my pond I set up indoors, and I shut it off last night because I was only using it to polish a little. And polish is a word that is used to describe mechanical filtration for new hobbyists. It's still cycling, but I want to run no filter. Thoughts? Oddball, how much other surface agitation do you have going on in that pond? That would be my question to you, that your canister filter output is probably causing surface agitation on that pond. And if you cut it off and do not run it, pay close attention and see if your fish are at the surface of the water kind of gasping, because what might go on is they've been used to having that canister filter cause surface agitation and get better oxygen exchange at the water surface. So it might be oxygenating your water better, gassing off the I would say harmful gases, but they're not really harmful. They're just not needed, CO2 and stuff. None. I am building it to breed rope fish, and their natural habitat is stagnant. So I want the water as still as possible. They are air breathers, so no worries about oxygen, and the fish aren't in it yet. Okay, all right. That makes sense. So for a new hobbyist, Oddball Aquatics is talking about and this is where research comes in so handy. He is talking about he had a canister filter running on a pond to use it to polish the water. In other words, mechanical filtration. He was not using it for biological filtration because it really didn't need it. And he is going to stock the tank with fish that are air breathers. And there are a lot of different fish in the hobby that can absorb oxygen from the air and or breathe oxygen. Actually, they surface and take a gulp of air, and that's how they get their oxygen, or that's how they can get their oxygen. Um, they don't depend on their gills as much as most gilled fish do. And this is the kind of stuff that you will find out by doing research on what your fish is, how it behaves, and all that. Oh, Oddball Aquatics is a chick. Yes, I do know that. And you're right, I did say he. I'm sorry. Anytime I hear oddball, my brain immediately goes to Eric Bodrock because he's Oddball Aquatics. All Oddball Aquatics, I guess, is the key word there. I'm sorry about that. But I think it's a very good point that you are using right. That's Cobweb Caverns brings up exactly what I think. He's a great guy. I think you'll enjoy him a lot. I think that aren't you helping Lucas, and aren't you going to get his big lotus plant to put in your ropefish tank? I think the critical point that I'm trying to get at here is, and the thing that I think that you said that is the most pertinent to this topic, is that you are going to have plants in that tank. And if you have a high enough plant load in a tank, it is its own water filtration. And right, I did know that. And that red lotus will set leaves on the surface of the water, and it will not like surface agitation. And because of that, I think not using a canister filter is probably your best way to go. A lot of people have problems with duckweed and a lot of types of plants that live on the surface of aquarium water and take up surface area on aquarium water. I am here to tell you, all you have to do to kill duckweed is to have surface splashing. If there is enough surface agitation, if there is enough water splashing on the surface, I've always been a firm believer of having one of my canister outputs spray directly against bare glass on the other side of the tank. I always set one to shoot straight across the top of the water and hit the glass on the front. Of course, you have to have a lid to keep the water from escaping, but it will kill any water lettuce, duckweed, lotus, anything that sets on the surface does not like continuous water on it at the surface. Right. So I think that because you're going to put that red lotus in that tank, in that pond, that you will do very well to not use a canister filter that's spraying water out over the top of the water and hitting the tops of those lotus leaves, because it will kill them. They will die off immediately. So yes, and I think it's very important that new fish keepers understand that um, plants are their own area of filtration. If we're talking about filtration and how a new fish keeper can go about filtering a tank, the cleaning process that plants go through, absorbing CO2, releasing CO2, and when the lights are off or when it's dark, absorbing oxygen at nighttime, all of those functions of a plant, by drawing up the needed nutrients out of detritus in the gravel or the sand or the dirt that's in the bottom of the tank. A plant by itself is its own filtration device. And that is a very important key for new fish keepers to know. Now, they may not be very good at keeping plants alive, but that's probably because they don't understand what is required for a plant to survive in a tank. The nutrients that it needs to take up. Right. Cobweb says that his main show tanks get 0 water changes, only top-offs. And while you can get away with that for a long time, Cobwebs, I would still recommend doing small water changes. That's just my recommendation. Maybe 10%, maybe 20%, because you may end up with, because of the plants that are in your tank, you may end up needing to add some of the minerals and metals that are in tap water back into your tank. If you notice your plants aren't doing so well, you're probably needing some minerals. Now, if you add fertilizers to the water, then that's something else entirely. But if you're not doing water changes, thanks, Oddball, and tell Lucas I said hi. My wife and I came and looked at his fish room, and we loved it. It's an incredible personal setup that Lucas has going on. I'm really looking forward to the time when Lucas can get a building out back to put all of his tanks in. He'll really nerd out then. Maybe we'll see him keep some large cichlids then, which I would love to see him do. I still want him to spend some time keeping tetras to really get a breeding program going on. He seems to be having some difficulty with that, and I'm sorry for his troubles on that end of things. But back to the topic. I think that it is important that new fish keepers begin to all right, thanks. That we talked about the 3 main types of filtration as they are described, being mechanical, chemical, and biological. And chemical we didn't really talk about very deeply, but there are a lot of different kinds of minerals, treated mats, purigen. There are a lot of different ways that you can add something to your tank that will change the water quality in that tank. You can add a bag of crushed coral to a hang-on back filter, and it will raise the pH in your tank slowly and regularly. It will not be a quick change. It will be a slow rise in pH because the calcium in that crushed coral will harden the water, and it will allow the pH to be more stable, or it should allow the pH to be more stable. So in that sense, there are a lot of different things that you can add to a filtration method. A sump pump, canister filter, hang-on back, corner box filter, sponge filter. And lately, some of the most common filtration that we see in tanks are sponge filters. And I think this is a good thing because sponge filters are mechanical filtration in the sense that the sponge catches detritus and junk in the water and holds onto it. And two, they are a biological media, so that bacteria will colonize that sponge surface, all the surfaces, and they will add a great deal of water cleaning potential to your filtration. And a sponge filter can be driven by an air pump. It has no mechanical moving parts. The only thing that you're probably going to need to replace at some point is the air stone. The air stone that bubbles and drives the water, pulls the water through the sponge and up out of the stack, which is how the filtration happens. That's how a corner box filter works as well. Under gravel filters are basically mostly mechanical and biologic, and that can be driven by an air stone and an air pump as well. Just set an air stone down inside the stack, and it will pull water from underneath the gravel up the stack, and that will force water to be drawn down through the gravel to replace the water that is being moved. And it is also possible to reverse engineer an under gravel filter so that you put a power head on the stack of the under gravel filter, and you can only use one stack in this instance, and put the output of the power head down the stack, and then put some kind of sponge or some kind of filtering method on the intake of the sponge filter so that the water that's being pulled through the power head gets some mechanical filtration done to it. And then what happens is the water is pushed down under the gravel so hard that it is forcing detritus and stuff that normally falls to the bottom back up into the water column, and it will oxygenate all of the gravel. In a normal under gravel filter, you do get some colonization of the entire stack of gravel that sits on top of the under gravel filter because water is being drawn through it. But detritus will clog the gravel at the top, and so mostly you just get an inch or so of heavy bacteria colonization in the surface of the gravel. But if you reverse engineer that under gravel filter and force water down the stack, and it is forced back up through the gravel, then the water that is hitting the gravel at the very bottom is going to be just as oxygenated as the water that was hitting the surface of the gravel when the flow was the other way. And that might seem kind of confusing, but it is yet another way to make use of an under gravel filter that does away with the old downside to an under gravel filter, in the sense that an under gravel filter will clog over time because detritus gets pulled deeper and deeper into the surface gravel and blocks it off. Eventually it will get so clogged on the surface of the gravel. Now, you can ameliorate that by, when you're doing a water change, stick your siphon. Hey, 54 Punchy, welcome to the stream. If you stick your siphon hose down into the gravel and pull a little bit of the gravel up, then that will break up that gravel and pull a lot of that detritus buildup out of it. And that's recommended whenever you're doing a water change. If you do it with a hand siphon, if you do it with a python, I always recommend that you clean your substrate by sticking that tube down into the substrate, pulling a little bit of it up, then lift the tube up, let the substrate roll around until it breaks all up into little pieces again, and it will drop back down. Hey, Kaler's Aquatics, welcome to the stream. So, a common question that most new aquarists will have is, how much filtration do I need? And if you buy a canister filter, or if you buy a hang-on back filter, they will tell you on the package what they think, how many gallons per hour this filter will do. And mind you that that is brand new out of the package, without anything blocking any of the filter media, perfectly functioning full flow. So if you buy 100 gallon per hour hang on back, and I've got a Whisper 100 gallon on my 110 gallon oceanic tank, then it will do 100 gallons an hour. So that hang on back is turning over 100 gallons in 1 hour. Now, that means it's turning the tank over one time every hour. So I have also got on that tank a 404 Fluval canister filter. And I'm trying to remember, but I think it's 400 gallons per hour that it does. It's close to 400 gallons an hour. I can't remember exactly. But, hey, Joseph, welcome to the stream. We're finishing up the new Aquarius series, with the last episode being on filtration. And that's basically what we're talking about, or what I'm rambling on about. So my point is that I've got a 100 gallon hang on back, and I've got a 400 gallon per hour canister filter functioning. So basically what's going on is that every hour 500 gallons of water are being turned over in that tank. And turnover means to run it through a canister and then back out again. So if it's sucking up 400 gallons per hour and spraying out 400 gallons per hour after having run it through its media, then that's turnover. That's 400 gallons per hour turnover. And my personal, and I don't know that anyone has ever codified this, but it is my personal belief that turning over the water in your tank 5 times an hour is a good, solid filtration mark to hit. Now, I have other filters in that tank as well, so I'm doing a little more than that. But as filters clog up, they do a little less. And so if you can turn over the water in your tank 5 times every hour, whether it's a sump pump, whether it's a canister, whether it's an under gravel filter, whether it is a hang-on back filter, any type of filtration method, and then turn the water in that tank. If you've got a 40-gallon tank, then you need to turn 200 gallons an hour over in that 40-gallon tank to meet what I consider a solid Hey, Lumpy Dog, welcome to the stream. And Joseph chimes in that plants equal filtration. And yes, we do. We have talked about that, Joseph, and you're exactly right that plants offer a whole separate area of filtration that is beyond mechanical, biological, and chemical filtration that are the things that new fish keepers will see when they're looking on the internet trying to figure out what kind of filtration method that they need to apply in their tank. And plants are another completely separate area of filtration, and they are a very effective one. I was talking with Oddball Aquatics about Haley's. Haley's got a pond that she's using to keep rope fish in, and she's going to have a lot of plants in that tank. And I noticed that Lucas was talking about her getting the red lotus out of his new large fish tank. I can't remember how, the 240 or something that he's got. It is my experience, anecdotally, and I have read it many places, that like the Diana Wallstad recommends that if you are going to run a planted tank, you want very little aeration, very little surface disturbance, and very little spraying of water, like from a spray bar from a sump return or from a canister return on the surface of that water, because what happens when you add surface agitation, either by a spray bar or my method of shooting the output of a canister filter straight across the tank and hitting the glass on the front so that it splashes and sprays. Joseph says he came back from Aquashella with 11 new species of plants and a bed of fish. Awesome, Joseph. I'm looking forward to all of the videos. I have lived vicariously through you and the others on what Aquashella was like, and it looks like you guys had a lot of fun, that there were a lot of YouTubers there. My experience is that water splashing on the surface will kill plants that reside on the surface, like duckweed or water lettuce, or like the red lotus that Haley's going to get. And Diana Wallstead recommends to not have a lot of surface agitation in a planted tank. In fact, she basically recommends no surface agitation. because, and it makes sense if you do your homework, if you do your research, and figure out that what's going on with added surface agitation. Because at the water's surface, if that's the only place where air meets the water, at that water's surface, there is an exchange going on continuously. Carbon dioxide and other gases are being released from the water, and oxygen is being absorbed back into that water. Right, Joseph, there is a great deal of truth to that statement. But a lot of surface agitation, a lot of heavy flow in a tank will also oxygenate the water. But for the purpose of plants, if you have a heavily planted tank, those plants need that CO2 to get their carbon from. The carbon's one of the building blocks that plants use to grow, to expand themselves. And so CO2 is really important to plants. So if your filtration method is dependent on plants, if plants are the biggest filtration method that you are using, then all of the other things that you can use, mechanical, biological, chemical, all of those things should be of a much lesser amount because those plants require the water column to offer them the carbon that they need from processing CO2, and they will give off oxygen in that process. And then at night, they require oxygen. And yeah, me too, Joseph. I relive it every time I watch the background on this stream. I'm sure it's gotten old to a lot of other people that are like, man, when's he going to quit running those pictures as a background? But for me, it's really good. And for those that don't know, that's a picture of Joseph right there. I do believe that it is important for new fish keepers that have no idea how to grow plants and keep plants alive in a fish tank yet. They've just got plastic decorations or plastic plants in their tank and gravel. I do think that it is important for them to understand the value of turning that water over in that tank through some kind of mechanical and biological filtration method. So I think that that's important for them to get an understanding of and to learn how to use filtration methods that are not plants. If they have green thumbs, if they are able to start right out, or they get lucky enough starting right out to keep a whole tank full of plants alive, then I think that it is important to scale back the amount of filtration that they are using in that tank. And that's relatively easy to do. You could put a sponge filter on your hang on the back intake. There are a lot of ways that you can scale back the amount of filtration that's going on in a filtration system. And I think that those one of the downsides of using canister filters and hang on back filters, and even sump filters for that matter, is they require regular cleaning to keep the water flow up. and to keep them from becoming nitrate factories. Uh, Whereas we set up biological filtrations to help remove nitrate from the water, it is possible when they get clogged up with detritus, when the filter medium or the media, biomedia gets so clogged up with detritus and bits and pieces of junk and algae that it is unable to keep the same amount of bacteria alive anymore. The porousness of it has gone down so much that basically the bacteria can only colonize the surface of it, that it is possible for your canister filter to pump out nitrates instead of remove nitrates from the water. So you can't set up a filter media and then just let it go and not ever do anything to it. You will need to regularly, and most people say once a month or maybe once every 2 months, you should take all that filter media out, shut the filtration method down, remove the media, and rinse it out real hard in a 5-gallon bucket full of tank water that you have pulled out. If you take it into the kitchen and run it underneath the water coming out of your tap, 9 times out of 10 that water is going to be chlorinated unless you are on a well. And when you run that media through with chlorine, you will remove a lot of the detritus, but you're also going to kill a lot of the filter media. So in that case, if you're rinsing your filter media out under your tap, then I would recommend just pulling part of the media out and cleaning it really well under the tap, and then putting it back in the canister or the hang-on back or the sump, and then that will allow bacteria to recolonize part of it from the rest of it. And that will keep it from being bacteria dead and just being a water flow, basically, because there's no bacteria in there to do any biological filtration. So you can use tap water to clean, and it will clean just fine, but it will clean so well that none of the bacteria survive, or very few. And that's why most fish keepers will siphon a 5-gallon bucket of water out of the tank when they're doing a water change and set that bucket aside and use that bucket to rinse filter media from that tank into that bucket. And then once all their cleaning of the filters are done, then they will dump that water out. And by the way, when you dump that water out, your garden is a great place to put it. It's going to be high in nitrates, which plants love. And a garden plant likes nothing better than to get a good douse of aquarium water every now and then. All right, guys, I think we've covered this topic fairly well. I've not seen anyone respond in a while, so I'm wondering if maybe my live stream has quit because I'm getting the endless cycle on the page. So I'm going to end this live stream right here, and this will be the last of my 10 So You Bought a Fish Tank new fish keeper streams. I always welcome questions. You can put them in the comments. You can put them in the live streams if you're here when the live stream's going on. So I hope you guys have a good rest of the weekend and good luck with your fish. And I am out.